Thank you very much for coming along. What I'd like to talk to you today is some of the kind of unusual squid that we have locally in New Zealand. And their cousins, octopuses and other cephalopods. They are quite sneaky, among other things, so I'll focus a little bit on the ways that they make themselves less able to be found, which is very frustrating for squidologists, but probably quite good for them as a survival strategy. So most people probably, without really knowing why, would be able to say that on the left is an octopus and on the right is a squid. Before we proceed with the talk, I'll tell you a little bit more about why that is, so that you can recognize some of the specific bits I'm going to tell you about. We have an octopus on the top and a squid on the bottom here. In general, octopuses are kind of bulbous. They live on the bottom. They sort of crawl along on their 8 arms, and squid tend to be sort of torpedo-shaped and pointy, although you'll see there's some major exceptions to that. They live in the middle of the water column, and they tend to swim by jetting or by moving their fins, and they don't really go near the bottom, generally. As far as some terminology that I'll be using goes, basic body parts of any cephalopod, squid or octopus, include the mantle, which is the thing on the octopus that looks like a giant nose. It's got all of the internal organs in it, all the digestive stuff, the hearts, and that is basically, a big sack of innards at one end of the body. They've got a head, very much like we have. It's got the eyes and the mouth and the brain and most of the sensory stuff. It's kind of the central processing unit. A funnel underneath, which they use for jet propulsion swimming, for escape behaviors, and sometimes just that's their normal mode of swimming. They all have 8 arms, octopuses and squid both. They're not legs, technically, although we do hear that quite a lot as well. And then a squid, additionally, will have 2 longer feeding tentacles. All squids have them at some point in their lives, although some of them lose them at a very young age. And then squid also tends to have 2 swimming fins. Sometimes they have an extra set of them at the end, but this is quite rare in octopuses. So in general, these are the features that distinguish them. As far as some internal parts that I'll be mentioning go, a squid has got, because I'm going to focus on squid today, has got a hard structure inside the top of the mantle called the gladius, or the pen, which is like a cuttle bone, which is actually what you feed to your budgie if you've got a pet budgie. They need a little bit of chalk from that. And that's kind of like a backbone. It just gives a little bit of extra support to the muscles. The mouth is a pair of beaks, and actually up here at the front, if you'd like to look afterwards, I've got a couple of sets of beaks from the museum collections that you can look at. It's an upper beak and a lower beak, just like a bird beak, and that's what they use to cut up their food and swallow it. Inside behind the beaks is a kind of tongue with teeth on it, which is a little bit like a cat's tongue. Clearly this is not a squid tongue. But it's called the radula, and squid don't actually have any muscles for swallowing, so they use that toothed tongue like a conveyor belt to shove the food that they've cut up down the esophagus. They've got 3 hearts, 1 main heart and 1 heart for each of the gills inside, and then they also have a donut-shaped brain. And the esophagus, which the food gets shunted back down, actually passes directly through the middle of the donut-shaped brain, and that's true in all cephalopods as well. Doesn't seem like a terribly good design, but they are a very successful group, so apparently it works for them. So the only feature that's absolutely true of every octopus and every squid that differentiates them is that an octopus has got suckers that have no hard parts in them. They have very flat, fleshy suckers. They're very strong. And a squid has got some kind of hard inner ring in the suckers, which is sometimes developed into a hook like this one. Sometimes has lots of teeth around the outside. That's a giant squid one on the top. And that will be true of any squid or any octopus. So if you're ever faced with the awkward situation where someone asks you, is this a squid or an octopus? You can check the suckers. You can say, I know this because someone told me once on a Wednesday at the museum a long time ago. And the only functional difference for someone generally needing to know that is if you're a person who likes to handle cephalopods frequently, it's much nicer to handle octopuses because those flat, fleshy suckers will give you small hickeys, but they won't shred your skin. So most people generally don't need to know that. Other cousins within the cephalopod group include cuttlefish, which we do not have in New Zealand waters, although we do have a specimen up here if you'd like to see what one looks like. There are lots of them in Australia, including up on the upper left is a giant cuttlefish, Sepia palma, and that one gets up to about 1 meter in total length, so it's a very large species. Nautilus, which is a tropical living species. We don't have that here either. And then this is a paper nautilus. Looks like it's related to that one, but actually this is an octopus, and this is a female, and that shell that she's built is an egg case, and we do have these in New Zealand waters. So if you're very, very lucky, and the weather conditions have been just right, sometimes these really beautiful, fragile egg cases will wash up on the beaches. And then there's the vampire squid, which is called a squid, but is a completely different evolutionary branch and is a very primitive animal. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a little while. We do actually have those here as well, but they live very deeply and are not very often encountered. So what I'd like to focus on mostly today is the masters of disguise, sneaky aspect of squid. So octopuses are really famous for this as a trait. People often know that they're very good at camouflage. They can change the color and texture of their skin. This is one of the common octopus species you'd see around New Zealand if you were a diver. It's characterized at least partly by this orange skin under the arms. So if you're ever out looking around and you want to know, what kind of octopus it is, this one tends to like to come out and look at divers as well. So if you like to play with stuff that you find when you're snorkeling and diving, these guys are pretty good for being interactive. But I'd like to give you an example here of the kinds of camouflage that
and an octopus. Isn't that amazing? No, Roger spooked him so that he took off with a cloud of ink, lands, and when he lands, the octopus says, "Oh, I've been seeing, best thing to do is get as big as I can get." That big brown makes his eye spot very big. That was all graphics. So here it is in reverse. Watch the skin color, watch the skin texture. Just an amazing animal. Can change color and texture to match the surroundings. Watch him blend right into this algae. 1, 2, 3.
Yep, that's the actual texture of the skin that comes up into little peaks and points. It's astonishing, and rightly so. They're famous for being able to do this. More so because, as far as we can tell, octopuses are completely colorblind. So somehow they're able to match not only the grayscale texture and color of what they're sitting on, but actually the colors without apparently knowing what it is that they're seeing. So there's a bit of mystery around how they're actually able to do that, but most species of octopus can do it. And so, if you're a person who likes to find octopuses while you're diving, that's very difficult, because if they don't want you to find them, you don't find them, generally. So octopuses are amazing at this. I want to go back to the vampire squid here a little bit as well. While it's not able to change its skin around quite so much, the vampire squid has some really unusual abilities in order to be undetected and to escape from predators as well.
It blends in well with the dark of the abyss. It seems naturally protected, yet it has light-emitting organs. Exactly how does it use them? What other discoveries can Dr. Robeson and his team look forward to? Suddenly, Vampiroteuthis starts to open its mantle. The membrane envelops its body, completely changing its appearance. It's an incredibly dramatic way of avoiding danger. And this isn't the only secret weapon that this amazing creature uses to escape attack. The super-sensitive high-definition camera captures the light-emitting organs. These resemble a pair of bright eyes, and researchers suspect that they're an effective deterrent to potential predators. So despite having hardly changed its basic shape, this living fossil has developed some amazing adaptations to survive in this twilight world.
So people like to dramatize cephalopods quite a lot. So clearly the name Vampiroteuthis infernalis is very, it's quite a creepy looking thing. You pull it out, it's kind of black and red and really alien looking. And the trouble with a lot of deep sea stuff is it looks amazing, but you have no sense of scale in the photographs. So it's fun to play around with that a bit, but I have to tell you that Vampiroteuthis is about that big. Like a lot of anglerfish and viperfish, where you see the huge teeth and you think, "Ooh, it's a big monster." Most of it is about sort of that size or smaller, and it's true of Vampiroteuthis as well. So we'll move on from the primitive vampire squid to the actual modern squid. This is a coastal broad squid. Sepioteuthis, this is one that you would see reasonably often in coastal waters around New Zealand. If you like to go up to Goat Island, they hang around there. Although they're quite speedy, so if you're in the water looking around, often you'll see little blobs of ink which tells you that squid have been there, but they knew you were coming before you got there and they took off. So I've seen these guys 1 or 2 times. Normally you see the very small ones. And if you've seen kind of finger-like clusters of white stuff growing in the kelp, those are sepia-toothus eggs. So in New Zealand, as far as squid goes, we have been blessed with more species of squid than any other country so far that we know of in the world. We have more than 92 different kinds of squid in New Zealand waters, and actually probably a fair few that we don't really know about yet. So my particular area of research is taxonomy. I'm trying to put the right name on the right thing and identify things that we don't know about yet, and make sure that the things we do know about so far have the right name on them. And New Zealand is a great place for that. I've got a couple of grad students who are working on this as well, and hopefully within a couple of decades, maybe, we'll actually know accurately what we have in New Zealand waters. But it takes quite a long time to figure out what it is you're actually looking at. You've got to look at original specimens and descriptions and make sure that what you're looking at is exactly the same. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But basically what you need to know is I'm going to show you some really cool different kinds of things that we have, and that's a tiny, tiny subsection of what actually exists in our waters. So we have some sort of normal looking squids like the broad squid, and then we have some really unusual looking ones. Up on the left is also quite a primitive thing called spirula, and this is actually where the little ram's horn shells come from if you find them on the beach, mostly on the west coast around here. That is the pen of this squid. So instead of having a long, thin chitin thing, it's got this calcium spiral inside it. And that actually sticks through the end of the mantle, kind of in the same way that your teeth stick through your gums. So for some reason, that seems to be a good design for the squid. It's about that big. And the shells, there are so many of them, it's clear that there must be a lot of these guys, although you don't see these squid very often. We've got some little non-commercial species that grow up to about this size. They don't taste very good, but they are interesting in that they've got hooks on the ends of their 2 long tentacles. So you probably wouldn't want to be cuddling those too much. And then we've got some really unusual looking ones. They belong in a family called the glass squids, the Cranchiidae, and this is one of them. And they're called light bulb squid as well sometimes, because they tend to be very unusual shapes, and at rest, their mantle is pretty much completely see-through. So what you would see hanging in the water would be kind of a bubble-like thing with some eyes and some arms. And I'll show you a couple more of those in a second. So transparency actually is a reasonably common strategy in deep sea squid. If you can't be dark red or black so that things can't see you, of course you could be completely see-through so that they see through you instead. And another thing that they tend to use to help with their camouflage and their stealth is light organs, or photophores. And there are lots and lots of different kinds of those. Many squid have them on the eyes. If you think about looking at something transparent from underneath with the light from the surface above, one of the things that's going to stand out in that transparent silhouette is any solid objects that can't be transparent, and that includes the eyes. So if you've got a light organ under the eyes that matches the light coming from the surface, that effectively blocks out the shadow that you would have from the eyes. And so where they tend to have the light organs is where they have structures that cannot be transparent. So lots of them on the eyes. These again are some of the glass squids, some of the really weird looking ones. Aaron here is one of my students, and he's actually studying this one. This is Tuthawini again. And they, again, are transparent with some light organs. You can sort of see them on this one. These are light organs under the eyes. And this squid is actually the same as this one. This is the baby version, and this is the grown-up version. And it can be either dark red or it can be transparent, and it can go very quickly between one and the other. So here's some more light organs. Some of them have a single big light organ that is under the eyeball and blocks out the shadow. Some of them break up the outline with lots of little kind of jewel-like light organs. And some squid actually block out their entire silhouette by covering themselves underneath with light organs. So that one's called the Firefly Squid. They're found in mostly around Japan. And I'll show you a little video so you can get a better idea of how those light organs underneath can block out that silhouette. And when they haul in a net full of these things, the entire net is glowing blue because all of the squid are covered with these light organs. It's very beautiful and kind of sad if you're a squid lover and not a squid seafood lover. So this is a bit of what the photophores look like in situ. They're always a kind of a blue-green light, which is the wavelength that transmits the best in the deep sea. Most other wavelengths of light disappear very quickly, so almost all animals that have bioluminescence will glow in this kind of color range. And as you can imagine, the light coming from the surface is just about the same color of blue, so that squid looking at it from underneath would essentially disappear. So what is all this sneakiness about? Well, just to give you an idea, this is a really messy food web. It's pretty indicative of what it looks like in the ocean. Everything eats everything else, and it's very hard to figure out what's actually going on, especially because often all you have to go on is the stomach contents. So you've got to look through the digested bits and figure out what it originally was and how much of it. You don't need to know this, it's not going to be on the test. But what I want to focus on is what squid like to eat, sort of the things in the middle. And something that's coming out as we learn more about squid is that as other things are overfished, like certain commercial fish stocks, squid actually tend to expand and fill those roles as well. So where large fish were previously one of the main predators in a system, once those large fish are removed, sometimes large squid species that live in the same place will sort of take over that role. So squid are very important in their own right, and they also maintain some balance, or in some cases throw out the balance in disturbed ecosystems. So they're using their stealth to sneak up on their many different kinds of prey, but probably more importantly, squid are eaten by almost everything in the ocean at some point in its life cycle. So squid are a very, very important link in most marine food chains as well. So we'll get Squidward out of there. And to give you an indication of how important squid can be to certain animals, one of the main things around New Zealand that likes to eat squid is dolphins and toothed whales. And according to some estimates, this is not universally accepted, but to give you a ballpark figure, the amount of squid eaten by just sperm whales in a single year in the oceans weighs more than the entire human race on this planet. So a sperm whale, an adult sperm whale, can eat a ton to a ton and a half of squid every day. And depending on the population estimates, that volume of squid that they consume is actually of a mass that's great enough that it's more than the biomass of humans on the planet. So there are lots and lots and lots and lots of squid in the oceans. So we've looked a little bit at invisibility, we've looked at camouflage and ways to hide themselves. Speed, squid tend to swim very quickly, although it's quite energy expensive, so there are not very many species that swim around really fast all the time, but they are capable of it when they need to. So here again is a little glass squid. Not that you would necessarily know that that was a squid. If you hadn't been told previously what you were looking at, I wouldn't have. And when disturbed, it releases a cloud of ink and speeds off very quickly, hopefully in the opposite direction, although many squid can move equally well in both directions. And in fact, some squid are able to go, I was hoping it wouldn't do that. Underneath the video here, unfortunately, is a photo of a squid that's actually flying out of the water. So some squid are able to swim so fast near the surface that they jet right out of the water and can avoid predators in small leaps into the air in that way. And the other thing, of course, that can be quite useful to them is size. We'll move on to the giant squid, which is what most people generally want to hear about. Clearly, if you're this big, not many things in the ocean are going to eat you. Also, you have the advantage of being able to eat a lot of smaller stuff because you're big enough to be able to catch it. Giant squid can grow up to about 13 meters, and they do have an advantage in not being eaten in that they also are not palatable to humans. So there's no opportunity for a giant squid fishery, luckily for them. They are full of chemicals, including ammonia, which bleach essentially, doesn't taste very nice and appears not to taste nice to anything in the ocean except sperm whales, actually. So we don't know if sperm whales really like the taste of ammonia or if they have no taste buds, but they seem to be one of the only things that actually likes to eat giant squid. So these guys, related to a lot of other squid, are actually probably not very strong swimmers. They have just these little tiny fins at the end. Sort of suggests that they're probably not moving around that fast, and the head is actually not that well attached to the mantle either, so if it was to put on a really big burst of speed, there might be a small risk of it actually falling apart in the middle. But luckily for the giant squid, it is just so big and so untasty that most things will leave it alone. And so all it really has to do is hang in the water column, dangle those really long tentacles down, and it just sort of picks up stuff underneath where it is. So its size doesn't really give it away because where it's fishing is a good sort of 8 meters down and quite invisible from where the most of the body of the squid is, as far as we know.
Does it mean that if they're giant, they're old, particularly old, or are they just predisposed to growing big?
Well, if they're giant, then they are approaching maturity, but there's some uncertainty as to what the actual lifespan is, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So in New Zealand, we tend to get giant squid specimens as bycatch from the hoki fishery, and they're found off the south coast of New Zealand, off the west coast in the winter, and off the east coast in the summer, and otherwise we have no idea where they are. They don't seem to be here between those times. No size of them other than full grown seems to be here, so there's a huge amount of mystery around what this animal is doing until it gets to this size, where it is, and why it's only here sometimes in the year. But occasionally we do get specimens of them, and from those we try to learn as much as we can about them. Clearly it's not very successful to go out and try to catch specimens ourselves to have a look at, and we'd rather not do that. But if they're accidentally being caught anyway, in hoki trawl nets, then of course we'll take that opportunity to learn what we can. So one of the things that we've been trying to figure out, which has also remained a mystery, is what do they actually eat? And the giant squid tends to capture people's attention because we see these scars on the heads of the sperm whales, and the sailors like to talk about how giant squid came up and pulled screaming people off the deck and down into the depths. And it is true, you get some pretty impressive scars on the heads of sperm whales, which are known to eat giant squid. The largest scars, I believe, are up to about that size, and the largest suckers that we know of on a giant squid are about that size. So while it's nice to think that there might be a squid that has suckers that big, more likely what's happening is a young sperm whale that doesn't really know how to eat big squid yet gets that scar, and as the whale grows, the scar is also growing. So as far as we know, there is no squid that has suckers big enough to leave the kinds of scars that we see, the largest scars that we see on sperm whales. But certainly they do have giant squid suckering scars and also scratches from another large species of squid that I'll talk about in a bit. So here are some of these fanciful illustrations of the kraken coming up and pulling the pirates off the ship. And giant squid generally are not found in waters any shallower than about 300 meters. So a healthy giant squid is not going to be at the surface. If it is at the surface, it's not going to be in any condition to put up much of a fight. But it is possible that whalers, for example, would have seen giant squid at the surface, because when a sperm whale is wounded, one of the first things it does is it vomits the stomach contents. So there would be squid carcasses floating around at the surface. Depending on how the grog rations were going that day, you might like to imagine that the giant squid carcasses at the surface were attacking your ship. But that seems pretty unlikely, given what we know about them. And of course, Captain Nemo and the Nautilus made the giant squid quite famous as well. And I suppose it's possible that a giant squid might investigate a submarine, but it doesn't make a lot of sense either. So, nice to think about this sort of thing, but submarines probably are not a diet staple for the giant squid. We'll just leave it at that. So one of those carcasses in the museum shot that I showed you with all of the giant squid on the floor actually had a full stomach, and that was the only one we've ever seen that had a full stomach. And it looked like this. I sent these photos in to be developed at a time before digital film was there, and when I got them back, the chemist said to me, "Can you just tell me what this is?" We placed bets on it, and the winning bet was rotting finger. But no, what it actually is it's the defrosting stomach contents of a giant squid with lots and lots of little bits of stuff in it. And the most interesting things that we found were pieces like this and suckers like this. And what we found in there essentially was the remains of smaller squid about this sort of size, fish like hoki, and the tentacle club of another giant squid. So these very large sucker pieces that we found in there, by comparing them to other known squid locally with large suckers, we determined that they actually could only have been the suckers of a giant squid tentacle. So this raises the possibility of cannibalism. Giant squid tend to eat stuff that's quite small. It's sort of in this size range, and that at least partly is because the esophagus, which goes through the brain, is about the size of your thumb. So if they're eating anything bigger than that, they still have to cut it into very small pieces. And a large squid might make a good meal for a long time, but it's not that energy efficient to capture it and chew it up either. So mostly they're eating small stuff. Our best guess at what was happening here was that the male giant squid is a bit smaller than the female giant squid, and we'll just say about giant squid reproduction that it's not a particularly tender affair. It's really nice that humans have a different method of reproducing than squid, because squid are actually quite violent about it. And there's a lot of arm thrashing and tentacle thrashing and beak gnashing. And the best guess is that it was actually accidental, the cannibalism. Nonetheless, it's all speculation. That seems like a fairly conservative conclusion to draw, and we're going to stick with that for now. But if it turns out, that they have a low population because they're eating each other, well, we'll have to find that out in a bit later, and I'm sure it will make lots of newspaper headlines at the time, so you'll hear all about it. So once the male squid and the female squid have cuddled, our best guess at what happens next, because there's a lot of guesswork here, is that they produce a large gelatinous egg mass like this. So this was a hypothetical structure until a few years ago. This was filmed or photographed off the Pornites Islands. You can see, hopefully, the edges of this egg mass are here. So this is about 2 meters in diameter. So the divers collected a sample of the eggs for us. We ran some DNA on it to find out what it was. And this is the egg mass of an arrow squid, which is about this size. So if an arrow squid egg mass is 2 meters, what does a giant squid egg mass look like? I would love to see one. I'd like to think that you could scale it up to the right size, and it's possible. But as soon as the egg samples were taken from this one, the perimeter was no longer structurally sound, and fish started to come in and eat all of the eggs that were in there. So it would be very unlikely for you to ever catch an egg mass like this in a net, because it just disintegrates. So until we get a lot better technology or learn where the giant squid egg masses are, I think it's going to be a bit of a mystery what they actually look like. So eventually out of that egg mass, hypothetical egg mass, will come lots and lots, several 100,000, of baby giant squid, which are probably born at about 2 to 3 millimeters. So the big question is, how long does it take them to get from 2 or 3 millimeters to 13 meters? And the ways that you can estimate age in giant squid, or in any squid, there are a couple of very small hard parts within the body, and those actually have growth rings in them like a tree. So there's a bone inside the head called the statolith, and that is like a fish otolith. It's a balance organ. You can cut that in half and count the rings, and in shallow water squid, those rings tend to be laid down on a daily basis. And by looking at those in a giant squid, if they're on a daily basis, then you get an estimate of about 1.5 years at maturity to reach that size. I mean, squid are eating machines, but that is ridiculous. It's possible. I mean, I'm not saying it's ridiculous and impossible, but I mean, just to think about the growth rate that would be involved in getting to that size within 1.5 years, there's a lot more that we need to find out about them. So the other two structures that you can have a look at are the gladius, the pen. Counting the rings on that, you get an estimate of about 6 years, again, depending when those increments are laid down. And then the islands is the other thing that you can count. And that gives an estimate of more like 13 years, which seems feasible. But on the other hand, there's no way to confirm how often those rings are laid down. So it's open to quite a lot of interpretation. So I want to take you guys down and talk a little bit about the giant squid specimens on display here. But I'll just touch very briefly on some other large and interesting things that we have around here. One of them is the colossal squid, which you've probably heard about. It's been in the media a few times in the last couple of years. This lives only in Antarctica. It gets up to about 6 meters in total length, but is considered bigger than the giant squid because it weighs up to twice as much, weighs up to about 500 kilos. So it's a massive animal, although not quite as long. So this is a model that the Discovery Channel built based on a specimen we got in 2003, just to get an idea of what it might look like in the water. And the eyes are quite cartoon-like, unfortunately. That was our best guess at the eye size at the time because the eyes are very fragile. So all of the specimens we had, they were damaged. And looking at some of the other glass squids, we sort of thought, well, this is apparently what the eye ratio is in this kind of squid. And in the meantime, the eye should probably be about the size of the pupil here. So not quite that big, but still quite large. So the eyes on the one we had in 2008 were about that big, which is the largest known eye in the animal kingdom. These guys live all around the Antarctic. They don't seem to range quite up into New Zealand waters. It's probably a good thing. They seem to like it where it's quite cold, and for that reason they do actually come all the way up to the surface in the Antarctic, because they're living at depths. Well, the giant squid lives at depths where the temperature is about 4 degrees, so the temperature barrier is always there between that depth and the surface, no matter what the season. In the Antarctic, the temperature is the same right through the water column, so these guys, if they're temperature dependent, can come all the way up to the surface. One big difference that everyone likes to focus on is the fact that on their tentacle clubs, at the ends of the 2 long tentacles, they have these swiveling hooks. So in place of those big suckers, they've actually got claws, and those claws can actually rotate around. So it's very science fiction-y. Quite cool, and they are very, very sharp. So scale-wise, this is probably slightly overestimated. This is an early perception of how big this animal might get. Realistically, it's probably a little bit longer than this, and this is a full-size giant squid. So much more massive, much shorter, and then again, there's a comparison between the suckers and the hooks. And up here, this is a colossal squid beak on the right and a giant squid beak on the left. So the colossal squid does seem to be better equipped to eat large, bony fishes than the giant squid is. So there's a nice close-up of the beak for you. You can almost see the teeth on the tongue in here that I was talking about before, and that's just with the scale of some hands to show that you probably don't want to put your fingers there, actually. So this was the big specimen that we had at the museum in Wellington in 2008. This is actually on display down there now if you want to go and have a look at it next time you're in town. And they have a really cool animation of what the babies probably look like and up through the lifespan. So they did a little computer graphics thing. The squid itself, the specimen is a little bit shrunken and discolored and looks a little bit like a Franken-squid now, but it's still pretty cool to see. It's probably one of the bigger squid specimens you'll see anywhere. So I mentioned that I do taxonomy. My own research focused for my doctoral studies on a family of squid that doesn't have any commercial importance but is very important for things like sperm whales. This family is found throughout the world's oceans, and they also have these nice hooks on the tentacle clubs. And to give you an indication of what taxonomy involves, if you come across a species that's new or a species that's not known very well, what you need to do is completely re-describe the whole thing so that somebody who comes along later after you can actually identify that you're talking about the same thing that they've got in front of them. So it involves describing all of the little bits, what the tentacles look like, what the hooks look like, if they have them, a full growth series if possible. So this is what the baby ones look like, and this is what the adults look like, so that no matter what size specimen somebody else has, they're still able to put the right name on it. So that's what I do. These are those hard parts. That's a shot of what that tongue with teeth, the radula, looks like. This is what the pen looks like in this species. And actually next to the radula, they have cheeks that also have teeth on them. So the inside of a squid mouth is probably not a place that anything really wants to spend a lot of time. And to give you an indication of the state of our knowledge, prior to this study that I undertook, all of the names in white were the recognized names at the time, and this is the full list of species now for this family. So the biodiversity that we know of just within this group is about doubled based on this study, and that seems to be a pattern that's holding true for a lot of groups that are undergoing taxonomic revision right now. So it might seem like we have a pretty good handle on what our species are, but actually there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Another group I'm working on right now has never actually been reported from New Zealand waters, even though we seem to have 3 to 4 species of them, and they're probably all new. So lots of things to be done. So people who want to study squid, if you want to completely change careers and come and study squid, you should do that, because we really need to figure out what we have here in order to actually take care of the resources that we have in our oceans. Just as an indication of how modern work is comparing with some historical work, this is what the tentacle club looks like in one of these squids that I'm working on right now. It's quite beautiful. The suckers are really cool. They have very nice teeth on them. And this is the kind of illustration that I'd like to include so people can recognize this. And this is the kind of illustration that was used to describe this species originally. So somehow you're supposed to know that that drawing with the funny circles that I could probably draw with my elbow and my eyes closed lines up with this squid. So, yeah. So here's just a smattering of interesting squids and octopuses that came in a research trip I went on in the Atlantic recently. So this is another project that we're working on. These guys were all pretty small, but again, just trying to figure out what we have in various parts of the world in the oceans. And based on that, again, we're doing some much closer look at what the little ones look like, what the tentacles look like, so that we can figure out, even at those small sizes, what it is that we're looking at. And I will leave you with some footage of the mystery squid. This is a squid that has been filmed many times, but no specimen has ever been captured as far as we know. And so at the moment, all we can sort of say is, well, it probably belongs to this group, but we don't know because we can't examine it other than seeing what it looks like in the water. And what it looks like in the water is like nothing else that we know of. It's got these weird sort of jointed arms, and all 10 of them, so all the arms and the tentacles seem to be the same, which is not known in any other group of squid either. And it's quite large, actually. They think it gets up to about 7 meters. So this is some huge, completely unknown thing that's drifting around the oceans, and it's been filmed in the Gulf of Mexico and Hawaii and various other places, but no one has ever had a specimen of it. So there's heaps that we don't know. If you have found this information interesting and would like to know more, people will come and post photos of sort of mystery squid that have been floating at the surface on this website, and people who keep cephalopods as pets actually come to this website as well. It's full of all things squid and octopus, so if you just are interested in these animals and want to find out some more, I recommend the Octopus News Magazine Online, or tonmo.com.